We will look at paper now. Examples of paper here. For example, there's a sort of thin pamphlet, just a standard letter on cartridge paper, and a thin leaflet. So again, with handling, same thing again, you're going to be wearing vinyl or nitrile gloves to protect yourself or protect the object, both. If it's really wet and there's paper literally floating in water, then you're going to take some Melinex, which I failed to pick up from the collection centre, but it's basically a fairly thick polythene, usually about 50 or 75 microns. We have lots of it in the collection centre and in other places, often made as sleeves for photographs or other bits of paper, as well as on rolls as well. And you can just use that to go underneath if it's floating, and then lift it up, and that way you're not putting any pressure on it, it's getting supported from underneath rather than your fingers just putting pressure on just a few small areas. You're going to place any damp paper flat on a sheet, so there's my sheet, or a bread crate, so something that can be flat but is also aerated. So to make it easier, I brought a pillowcase. But a pillowcase, again, is going to offer that support, but also allow, it's going to be permeable, so it's going to allow the object to dry. So we can take our objects and we can place them on the sheet and allow them to dry. We can also weigh them down slightly if necessary to keep them flat by placing another sheet on top, which if it's dry, can be smoothed out. Similar to paper, the risks are obviously that a lot of wet paper can be really heavy, so there's the temptation to overload trays because you think, oh, that's not that much paper, but when it's wet it is a lot heavier. The dyes can run and bleed and stain other things as well. If paper objects are stuck together, you don't want to separate them because you might run the risk of skinning the top layer of paper, or there might be ink transference, whereas if you let it dry naturally, there's less likelihood that that sort of thing will happen. Same if things are crumpled or folded, just leave it as it is. It's such a temptation, just want to flatten it out, but it's best to leave it if it's significantly folded or crumpled. Also being aware that if things have staples, like this has, that staples are likely to corrode if wet, so that's an additional risk, and anything with staples you might want to separate out from other wet items. And as with books, paper is susceptible to mould growth. And then in terms of removal to a safe area, the same as before, you get the things that are at greatest risk, or the things that are priority objects on our snatch lists, and then you get the remainder of the objects out. If you do have things that you can protect in situ, it's going to be less likely with paper, unless they're sort of like large folders or something that's framed or glazed. But it can be placed near walls and covered in polythene, because it might be that you've got lots of things, say, in a plan press, and you think actually that's fairly safe where it is, so you just want to cover that whole plan press with some polythene, and that will be against a wall anyway, and you know that the polythene will stop any water from seeping into the drawers as long as it isn't directly at ground level. Then yes, in terms of treatment, we will have a look at that now. You want to be air drying paper flat, so you don't want to like apply any heat to it or anything. You just want to keep it just air drying as sort of fairly gradually, rather than shocking the fibres of the paper into drying too quickly, and that's when you end up with things being crumpled up and so on, and you get cockling. And so you want to be drying paper out in individual sheets or in very small piles, so like max maybe like 4 or 5 millimeters. We already talked about not separating wet pieces of paper from each other if they're folded or crumpled. You might also want to consider freezing, and that's an option similar again to books. It's freezer paper and then freezing it immediately. If you do have something like this that's effectively sort of a thin pamphlet that's folded over, and you don't want to unfold it, then you can use a line to dry it, and lines can be really straightforward, and just like some cotton tape or some like nylon line, and you can just dry it on there. If it needs to be pegged, then you can use pegs with a sort of rubber grips in order to hold it in place. Probably there would be best, but with something like this, I don't think that's going anywhere, so I'd be quite happy leaving that. And even something like this, if this wasn't quite happy enough standing up, then it might be better to dry it on a line like this. So that's sort of fairly straightforward with pamphlets, whereas with paper, obviously you're not going to be able to dry that on a line, because if you peg it, it is far more likely to tear, because if it's got wet, then the fibres are going to be weaker. If you've got dry objects, then again, take them to the dry area, keep them dry, and you want to be putting them in a crate again, or any kind of sturdy box that you might have, and store it in a safe place. Labelling is really important in salvage situations. Documentation in general is really important. Things are happening really quickly, so if you can sort of label this as being a paper box 1 or objects from bedroom 7 or whatever, it just makes it a little bit easier to follow where things have come from and where they're going to. If you've got framed works, paper in frames, then yes, I don't really have anything that I can unframe at the moment, I'm afraid. I did look, but there wasn't anything I felt like I could really do that with. So if it's fine, then leave it in the frame, just leave it as it is. If the paper appears to be stuck to the glazing, then you want to leave it on the glass and dry it horizontally, like flat. So I'm just going to use this lovely picture that Eric did for me. So facing down, but in its frame, and then that's sort of best way to dry it. However, if it can be removed, so if it's not stuck to the glass, then yeah, just leave it. And anything that you've had to remove from the back, just make sure that it's bagged up and labelled as such in terms of where it belongs to. As we would sort of do normally anyway when we're changing fixings on artworks that are going on display.